Hello. En inglés, no. In English,
In
no?
English.
Okay. Good afternoon. Thanks for coming. Today to our event, Shifting Ground, Argentina's Political and Economic Outlook. We're very glad to have Rodrigo Zarazaga and Michael Shifter to be part of this panel to analyze the situation in Argentina, both financial and political, and also to understand the drivers of the U.S. decision to support Argentina in a very unprecedented way by extending so far a $20 billion swap line to Argentina last week, something that we have not seen in Latin America since the U.S. financial support to Mexico during the tequila crisis in 1995. As you all know, Rodrigo Zarazaga is a visiting fellow with the Georgetown Americas Institute, as well, obviously, as the director and lead researcher of the Instituto Universitario Centro de Investigación y Acción Social, CIAS. He's a Jesuit priest and holds a PhD in political science from the University of California, Berkeley, a postdoctoral certificate from the University of Notre Dame, as well as a Bachelor of Philosophy and a Bachelor of Theology at the University of Buenos Aires. He has written several books. One that just came out in print in 2025 called Poverty Shaping Politics, Machine Parties and Their Unexpected Challengers. Another book in 2002, The Poverty of a Rich Country, and edited several volumes. Michael Shifter is an adjunct professor at Georgetown University School of Foreign Service, former president of the Inter-American Dialogue, a leading policy forum on Western Hemisphere affairs based in Washington, D.C. Michael held senior positions at the Dialogue for nearly 3 decades, including his last 12 years as the president of the institution. He writes regularly in main outlets on U.S.-Latin America relations, and prior to joining the Dialogue, Michael directed the Latin American Caribbean program at the National Endowment for Democracy, and before that, the Ford Foundation's governance and human rights program in the Andean region. Michael graduated from Oberlin College and holds an MA in sociology from Harvard University. Let me just kick in with a very short story on how Argentina got to the point where we are today. Very quickly, Javier Milei took office on December 10, 2023, in the wake of an economic crisis and economic mismanagement by the previous government. Annual inflation in 2023 was higher than 200%, the second highest inflation in the world at that time, and GDP per capita has been declining since 2008. So the level of GDP per capita in 2023 was below what it was in 2008. After Milei took office, he very quickly consolidated public finance and achieved a balanced budget. A lot of that obviously supported by a huge unexpected inflation in the first 3 months of his administration, product of a devaluation of the currency and the adjustment of several public sector prices. But after that, on the back of an exchange rate-based stabilization, with the announcement of a 2% monthly crawl of the exchange rate, inflation started coming down. The economy in 2024 suffered a significant contraction, I think of 3.5%, and 5% if we don't look at or if we subtract the agricultural sector that had a relatively good year. Poverty increased a lot, but started to improve by the end of 2024. However, in 2025, the government faced and continues to face significant challenges. An important one on the political front are the midterm elections that are coming in October. Just for those of you that do not come from Argentina today, basically, Milei's political party, La Libertad Avanza, has minimal representation in Congress, a favorable midterm outcome that was expected some months ago could cement his party as the dominant political force ahead of the 2027 presidential elections. Obviously, a weak showing could significantly derail his government for the second half of his administration. The second important challenge is the fine-tuning of the economic program. I mean, recently on the back of a provincial elections in the province of Buenos Aires, suffering a larger defeat than what was expected, that impacted financial markets and actually pushed the government to very rapidly negotiate this financial lifeline with the U.S. administration. But also, I think it's important to think why, after signing a new program with the IMF in April of this year, the government was in such a financial weak position in August of this year, so that a provincial election actually forced them to hurriedly basically need to sign this program to provide some sense of stability in the foreign exchange rate market. Let me so basically in 2025 we had in April an IMF program that was larger than what everybody expected. I think there was an IMF first review of this program sometime during the summer, in which Argentina needed a waiver because it did not comply with the accumulation of international reserves that Argentina had committed to in that program. And then we just have the announcement of this additional $20 billion coming from the U.S. government to support Argentina. So I think the thinking is, what does the economic program need to fine-tune so that in 5 months we're not back again asking for another 20 billion programs to maintain an stable situation? An important part on the economic front is basically the exchange rate that has shown a significant overvaluation in the intent of maintaining a strong currency. The government has not been able to accumulate a significant amount of international reserves. Without a significant amount of international reserves, it's very, or at least the possibility of Argentina retapping the international financial markets to be able to satisfy its debt obligations in foreign currency for next year become questionable, and that kind of generates this negative feedback loop to the currency, to the bonds, and obviously to the real economy. All of that significantly weakened, in addition, by the possibility of the political pendulum shifting back to, let's say, the Peronist party in 2 years, and then Argentina continue to live in this swing between extreme left and extreme right policies that actually negatively affects investment, negatively affects stability, et cetera, et cetera. No? So I think in today's presentation and dialogue that we're going to have, I think I will read my 10 questions regarding the U.S. support for Argentina that I hope Michael and Rodrigo will answer. My answer to
all of them.
My answer
are you expecting us to answer all of them?
I think I got a D plus in answering these questions, because I said I don't know.
I think I will show you with the D plus.
So I think the first one, I mean, what are the reasons behind the U.S. support, and why actually the U.S. administration decided to give such an unprecedented support to a Latin American government, and especially to Argentina? What do we know? Is there any conditionality behind this, either on public policies or geopolitics? 3, I think what we have been hearing, or I have been hearing the last few days from the markets behind the expression of "show me the money," is saying, is the 20 billion really 20 billion? Or part of that is window dressing, part of that will not be available? What do we know? Can we read the fine print of the let's say the contract or the agreement? then is all U.S. support additional, or will the U.S. ask for Argentina to cancel the Chinese swap? And in that sense, basically, Argentina will be changing creditor, but the total amount of resources available for Argentina will be relatively the same. How permanent is this? Is this a bridge to a future strengthened IMF program? And once that the IMF comes in, this thing gets reverted. Does this show the intent of the U.S. to build a stronger bilateral international financial safety net? Basically, continuing what we have seen that the current U.S. administration thinks that it would rather work through bilateral mechanisms rather than through multilateral organizations. I mean, that could be the initial steps of a new international financial governance. And then, Rodrigo, what is the political situation in Argentina today? What are the potential scenarios for the October elections and after that? Will uncertainty regarding a Peronist comeback be an issue delaying economic decisions and economic recovery in the next 2 years? Has Argentina society preferences regarding inflation, fiscal, and structural issues permanently changed? Or once that we go back to more normal politics in Argentina, will we go back to a larger size of the government, the lack of agreement regarding the tax system to finance it? So if we're not able, or at least if Argentina society is not able to take advantage of, on the financial side, the things that at least I think have been done right by this administration, kind of lock them in for the future, then we will gradually shift back to higher inflation, high debt, defaults, etc. Let me just close that. On my view, I think an important challenge for the Milei administration, what we saw in the elections in the province of Buenos Aires and lately with some other scandals associated with the government, is the vulnerability of his administration. Even if they do well in the midterm election, the sense of vulnerability will continue to be there. And I think to govern effectively, in my opinion, what Argentina needs is a broader center-right coalition to govern effectively. And I think there's an internal contradiction between what might seem to be effective politically to drive a campaign for re-election, that it to continue to be an outsider, to continue to be an anti-establishment, to continue to denounce the traditional political class, but on the other hand, to govern in the next 2 years in a relatively stable fashion. If you don't negotiate, if you don't become a little bit more of a traditional politician, he might face another important crisis during the second half of his administration. So with that, I will turn it to Michael that has to leave a little bit early, or okay. And just, I mean, as I mean, these questions were just to set the stage, but as always, you can say whatever you want. No.
Well, thank you, Alejandro. Hello? Oh, I have to turn it on. Is that right? No. Thank you, Alejandro, and welcome to everybody. Thanks for doing this session, and it's really a pleasure to see Rodrigo. And after the results of the election in the province of Buenos Aires, I thought of Rodrigo right away because he's done such incredible research for so long, and he seems to have his pulse on what's happening politically, especially in the province of Buenos Aires. So I'm anxious to hear that. I'll just be very brief because I don't have a lot to say. First of all, we should announce the meeting has been confirmed between Milei and Trump at the Oval Office on October 14th. So Milei will be coming here. Will be the second Latin American president to meet Trump after Nayib Bukele. I assume he'll get a better treatment than Zelensky got in his first trip here, but I think, going to your question, I can speculate about what some of the questions I think we don't know. I mean, I think that we just don't know a lot of details. Presumably, those details will come out eventually. But on why, strikes me that, that Trump wants to at least make a statement to show that he's going to sort of reward his friends and punish his enemies. And people, you're either with him or against him. And if Milei has shown one thing in his time as president, since Trump has been there, is that he's with them, and he's been with him, and he went to Mar-a-Lago, and we all know the whole story. And so I think there is an mutual admiration there, and we all know the Elon Musk and the chainsaw and all the rest of it. So I think that's kind of part of it. And if you look at the Latin America, the other countries are El Salvador and maybe Ecuador and maybe Paraguay, but Argentina is a major country, significant country, and so I think there is a kind of a desire to kind of to show support. I think they probably got very nervous after the elections in the province of Buenos Aires that Milei politically was in trouble, and wanted to sort of shore him up for the elections, at the end of October. And I think that was probably one of the motivations as well to do it. And I think in addition to shoring him up, on the other side of it, preventing, there's always been a strong anti-Peronist and especially anti-Kirchner sort of view that I think this certainly Besset and I think the administration has. And so it was also not only to shore up Milei, but also to prevent the Peronists from getting ground. So I think this is what, at least in my view, without having any inside information, but just trying to analyze sort of Trump and his gestures to different countries, either punishing them or rewarding them. This was kind of done in that spirit and with that purpose. I don't know. There is this sort of I've read that that it's sort of replacing the Chinese swap with the U.S. swap. I don't know. I don't think the U.S. policy in Latin America regarding China has been clear and consistent at all. It's been very spotty and very unclear. I don't think it adds up to anything. So that may have been part of it, but if it is, it's hard to see how it connects to anything else. I don't know what the conditionality is. That presumably will emerge. I do think there is definitely a strong preference to deal with Argentina bilaterally rather than through multilateral mechanisms. And I think that's true with all countries. The U.S. government tends to sort of prefer that anyway, but this administration particularly so, I think really has that preference. They don't like sort of multilateral institutions. They would deal bilaterally. But I wouldn't go as far as to say that this is sort of the start of sort of some sort of broader international strategy on economic policy. I'm not sure. This may just be a one-off and just kind of the product of being a little bit nervous and worried about these surprising election results in the province of Buenos Aires. I don't think anybody, you know better than I do, but I don't think anybody really predicted at least the margin of victory. And I think that kind of got them worried. In this city, Milei in general, and a lot of Brazilians and other friends, when they come here, they say they're struck by that Milei really has people speak very positively and favorably. Milei, he really is one of the leaders that he's doing, he's doing what he said he's going to do. He's brought that inflation and the like. And so I think they have stake in sort of him being successful. So that's what I would say.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Alejandro. It's always a pleasure to be here. I consider always myself at home at Georgetown because I'm a fellow here, but also because I'm a Jesuit. So let me go a little bit back to where Alejandro more or less picked it up. So usually in Argentina, the midterm elections are held with the national election. So actually no one is strictly focusing on the result on the province of Buenos Aires because it goes all under the national election. But actually to decide when the state election is, when the province of Buenos is decided by the governor. And so the governor, Axel Kicillof, who was Cristina Kirchner, so within the Peronist, former Minister of Finance, make a very bold decision and decides to split up the election and have it in September while the national election are in October. So there was more or less 55 days separating the state or the province of Buenos Aires election from the national election. Actually, Cristina Kirchner thought it was a very bad idea because Peronist was going to lose, and they keep in a kind of internal fight within the Peronists if this was a good or a bad idea. Contrary to Cristina's expectation and to many people, as you say, Michael, expectation, Kicillof and the Peronist front in the province of Buenos Aires won by a wide margin. It got 47% of the vote against 33% of the vote. So Milei's party, La Libertad Avanza, barely make it to 34%. And there might be a question here, and I think we have been getting with an Argentine group of politicians from CIAS, and we have been getting this question a lot in the United States. Why do you care so much about the state election? You know, how is possible that after the result of the state election, the country is a completely mess again, a nightmare? The following day, the Argentine bonds came 20% points down, the peso devaluated, the dollar, so we have bonds controlling the official bonds that control the price of the dollar. The dollar came up above the official bond. The country risk went over 1,400 points. All that because of a state election. Well, it is a state election, but an election of the state that comprise 40% of the national electorate. So in one state, we have 40% of the national electorate and 50% of the poor of the entire country. So when the electoral result of this state, the province of Buenos Aires, is that wide, you start to think that in the national election, you are not going to, the government is not going to take back from that. So if the opposition wins by such a big margin, and there is a section that is mainly the south of the city of Buenos Aires that comprises something like 24 municipalities, and you have like 6 million voters, and if the gap there is above 20%, you pretty much know that you will not recover from that. If you lose by a margin in those poor municipalities bigger than 20%, it's very hard to get enough votes in the rest of the province to overcome that result. And so, as Alejandro was saying, people say, well, the Peronists are going to be back, so this economic austerity plan is not going to hold, and the peso is going to devaluate, and so in what is almost an Argentine sport, we start to buy dollars. Then Trump jumps in unexpectedly. No one was expecting this, and say, well, I am backing Milei. Actually, he said, I am backing Milei for re-election. I'm not sure if he understood it was a midterm election. I really think he thought Milei was going for re-election, but that is going to be in 2 years, no, not now. And so suddenly the market say, okay, we are fine again. Everything is perfect, we are fine. And the country risk came down again. The dollar came below the band. So is this now the world like this 20 billion that we have not seen, and no one knows the conditions, so we cannot answer about that. I don't think even the treasurer can answer that question. They say we are going to put 20 billion, and then they are discussing how are going to be the details about that. But I really think not even in the IMF that put the rest of the money, as you know, they don't really know how this is going to work or which are the conditions. But I think there is an interesting question there is an important question, because I think this is what is introducing a lot of noise in the Argentine political economy situation. And it's how Milei, who won the runoff by getting around 55% of the vote, now came down in the most important state, the one that decides the national election, to 33%. So we have a big gap there. And there is a big discussion in Argentina going on now, and actually we are getting that in your questions too, is one people, probably those closer to the government in views that support the austerity program, that support the idea that we need a fiscal order and zero of fiscal deficit, say, well, this has been a political problem. And then there's the group probably closer to Peronist, to Kicillof, who won the election, saying, no, there is a profound problem with the economic model. And if you ask me, I think it's worse than that. Milei has both problems altogether. So first, which is the political problem, no? And I think that's the central puzzle here. After his decisive victory in 2023, Milei convinced himself that he had a mandate for changing Argentine culture. So he understood that the people and then even after winning, his popularity went up to almost 70%. So he thought he has a strong mandate to change the Argentine culture. I really thought that halting inflation and bringing deficit to zero was his only mandate, and that people were going to tolerate every kind of effort if he could bring inflation down. So he was mainly committed to that. And he believed he had the votes, the electoral support, enough electoral support to do that without anything else. So he kind of retrenched over a very small team and without seeking for any type of coalition. He could have treated the center-right coalition, Cambiemos, the one that led Macri some time ago. He could brought them into his coalition because they were much closer in the ideas. Actually, he could have brought also the Coalición Cívica, we got a representative here from the Coalición Cívica, but he won by having this strong speech against the political system, and he got that incredible support, so he was not willing to try to build this bigger coalition. Even when in the Congress, he was in a terribly minority. And actually, what happened by not seeking the support of the governors, not seeking the support of these possible allies, he ended up in a pretty weak position. And in the weeks before the election, Congress passed law by law, increasing spending and even overriding veto or overriding the presidential veto on some of the spending. What has not happened, I think, since the days of Alfonsín in 1985, more or less. So a huge political problem to understand that the support of the votes were enough to be able to not build a coalition in Congress through the governors. I think that was a terrible problem that the government of Milei is facing. So he showed to be really weak in the face of the first electoral defeat. The second one is the economic problem. And I think because he felt he had a mandate to halt inflation. So Argentine economy has mainly two possible engines of growth: exportation of commodities or domestic consumption. And those two, they need different exchange rate, so you need a high exchange rate to export, and to have high consumption, you need the peso over value. Milei was so convinced that the only thing that mattered to the people was to halt inflation, and that if he halt inflation, they will support any kind of austerity measure, that he anchored inflation by overvalue our peso. And obviously that takes exportations out of the possible drivers of economic growth. But in this case, it didn't bring domestic consumption either, because the salaries and pensions were lagging behind inflation. So in some way, he lacked any of these two possible engines. And he was committed to keep the peso overvalued because he thinks that the only thing that matters now in Argentina is to keep inflation low. And that was a trap, because the poll said that people were going to endure suffering as long as he stop inflation. But one thing is to say that you will support suffering, that you will support starving, and one thing is when you are not able to feed your kids every night, then that support tend to disappear faster than the poll said. So in both regards, he ends having big challenges. In the economic front, because he doesn't have any of both engines for growth, and in the political, because he doesn't have the coalition big enough to support the deficit zero plan. And why I am coming back to that? Because I think that after the 20 billion that Trump threw in, the challenge is still being exactly the same. You know? I mean, almost a little bit more of 5 months ago, the IMF gave us another 20 billion. And where are they now? You know, they were not enough to avoid the country risk to go over 1,400 points. They were not enough to avoid the political and economic crisis. So it's not clear that the 20 billion are there. The conditions are not clear, but I think in some way it doesn't matter. What it matters is Milei still having the same both challenges that made him lose the last election. The economic model and the overvalue peso and a weak government to face the challenges he's facing. And we have an election coming in October. Michael was showing me Trump is meeting Milei the 14th, I think. I don't see that changing the Argentine mood. I mean, the austerity program, people are having difficulties to make ends. In the province of Buenos Aires, where he suffered this huge defeat, people are having the unemployment rates are increasing. People are having difficulties to feed their families. I don't think that the picture with Trump will completely override that so that he can win in October. So I imagine a better result than in September, but not a result that could help Milei to avoid these two challenges. Build a bigger coalition and adapt his economic program so that at least Argentina can start to build some reserves.
Thank you very much, Rodrigo. Thanks, Rodrigo. I mean, very, very clear. Maybe, I don't know, Michael, on top of, maybe we can do like a short second round of comments before we open it up to questions from the floor. And with those, in addition to whatever you want to say, any ideas of what should be Milei's goals for the meeting with President Trump on the 14th?
Well, I could give people advice before they meet with President Trump. Oh, I'm sorry.
Wear a suit, no? Apparently,
What's that?
I hope that Milei wears a suit. I
Wears
mean,
a
no,
suit, right.
that might help.
Wears a suit, right? I just think to tell him he's the greatest president in the history of the world. And that would be the baseline, and then get even more than that. I think we've seen so many people go through the Oval Office, and some of the people, that have managed it the best, I think, is Keir Starmer has been very, very good. And, he might want to take, some, look at some videos of some of the other prime ministers and presidents that have passed through and that have sort of done pretty well. I think Milei should be aware, and of course he is, that, there's been a lot of pushback and a lot of backlash to this decision among Trump's base. It seemed just totally inconsistent with this idea that America first, we worry about ourselves. We got so many problems here, and now we're taking $20 billion, whether it's a swap or whatever form it is, and we're giving it to a country. And I think there's been a lot of pushback from from the base. I mean, I don't know how this happened, but I could imagine, just based on everything we've seen so far in these 9 months, that, Bessent went to, Trump and said, the markets are going crazy. We got to help Argentina. This is an important country. This is, one of our few allies in Latin America, blah, 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 blah. And Trump said, fine. And then MAGA kind of exploded and said, you're doing what? And they went to him and they said, we don't like this. And then Trump's kind of trying to figure out, what to do. That's kind of the way things work. It's not like he sits down and says, well, let's look at the pros and cons. That's not the way this administration functions. That's what I suspect happens. So, and then of course he's gotten pushback from also the Midwest, the soy farmers that are, that now are getting the market in China. And they're also very angry about this decision. So I don't know, I don't know exactly what it's going to sort of look like in the end in concrete terms. But, I think Milei will, I think needs to sort of communicate that he's got, that he has the support of the Argentine people, that he's pursuing this path, that he's trying to show, make Argentina great, like America's, that Trump is making America great. And, and I think, do his best in that way. I don't know what else. I don't know what else he should say or anything. But I think this is a problematic. I think this is presenting some problems for Trump that he probably didn't really think through and anticipate and weigh carefully before he gave the go ahead to Bessent to make this thing. That's my guess.
Yeah, I mean, reacting to what you said, Rodrigo, I think I totally agree that let's assume that the 20 billion are there, that they are for real. I think an important issue in eventually confirming the markets that the money is there, etc., is to use it. I mean, in much more normal situations in Mexico, we negotiated a swap line it was with the Federal Reserve, but it was under the auspices of the US government during the global financial crisis. And markets in Mexico were not believing that the swap line was really active. So I was working for the Mexican government. We came to the Federal Reserve. We said we need to use the money because people do not believe that we have the money. So we ended up drawing $5 billion, using it, establishing a line to lend to Mexican banks that had a shortage of dollars. And that kind of calmed the markets. They saw that the money was there. So the more information there's out there regarding the swap, the more the people see that the money is being used, at least just for show. I think we'll appease these concerns, but I think it's important for that. Hopefully in this meeting in the 14th, or before the meeting in the 14th, there are more details on this thing, and that actually generates some calm in the market. I think I totally agree with you that now what we have the morning after, we have the 20 billion, but the overvaluation problem is still there. The lack of flexibility in the exchange rate is still there. The pressures to eventually to move in 5 months for the exchange rate will still be there, and the political challenges are still there. Now, so the question is, on what front can you move? I think that the government of Argentina can move, I think, pretty effectively on eventually liberating the ceiling of this band. I think if the $20 billion from the US are there, and transparency is present regarding those resources, if the exchange rate is trading at $1,300, $1,350 at one moment, if you remove the ceiling of the band, it will continue to be there, because the stability in the exchange rate is not supported by the commitment of the ceiling, is supported by the availability of resources. So I think that the best time to do the move is to do it as quickly as possible. I think the government eventually can do that. I would do it today. They might rather do it after the election, but I think after the election, they can move ahead. especially on the back of clarity on the results. I think the challenges on the political front are much larger than on the economic front. I think the challenges on the economic front will be present much more on the real sector of the economy. I think when you do an exchange rate-based stabilization, I mean, the theory is very clear. When you do a money-based stabilization, you have a recession first and an expansion later. When you do an exchange rate-based stabilization, you have some mini boom first, and Argentina had it in the third quarter, maybe on 24, the fourth quarter, maybe the beginning of 25, but that it's gone. Now Argentina will need more exchange rate volatility, higher interest rates, etc. It will be harder to overcome that. And if political uncertainty starts feeding into the system, I mean, getting out of the situation that you were saying, that families are struggling to get to the end of the month, will be a real political challenge. So I do think that if the government is not able to forge a stronger political coalition, it will be a very long and difficult second half of the administration.
So I have some pesos here with me. Will you sell me dollars at 1,300?
Look, I'm telling you, the market is there, and what is sustaining the market today is not the announcement that the government is going to defend the ceiling. What sustained the currency today and what make the currency to come down from 1,500 to 13 something is the announcement that the swap is there. If you make an announcement that the swap is for real, that there's negotiations on the second review of the IMF program and part of the debt service to the IMF in the year 2026 is dealt with, it seems that $20 billion for now, it's okay. So it's not the commitment to defend.
Okay, I'm not going to argue with you because you are an
uh,
economist and you know that better than me. But
I think that's,
after losing a national election, I'm not sure that releasing the band is going to keep it there.
And from the point of view of financial markets and from the point of view of society, what is better, to start losing the money from the swap to defend 1,400 or just to let it float? I mean, in a way, regardless of what's the outcome of the FX market, Argentina is in a much better position with the $20 billion in their pocket and using it to service the debt and not to be in a default in 2026, that to sell dollars at 1,400, when we know that eventually, if this is the scenario, eventually the US will call and will say, look, let's not burn in our swap line, and let's start using our swap line intelligently. So in that sense, I think the counterfactual of not floating is so bad for Argentina that I think it's better just to float, accept the financial volatility that might come from it, but show the markets that you have the money for Argentina to avoid any type of financial default.
I agree. I really think they should have done it earlier, because now, after electoral defeat, the ceiling is less clear that you could have done it before.
You're totally right, but today it's earlier than tomorrow.
Okay, I can get that compromise. And I think the other issue is, and it's somehow what I was trying to make the point, Milei electoral success was based on, at least the initial electoral success and the initial support was based on the promise of halting inflation and in the promise of, not in the promise, in attacking the political system. It's hard for me to see now the flexibility to undo those two strategies. He is convinced he won and that he has the support. Now, maybe he realized the support is not there, because he was attacking the rest of the political system. So now when we ask him, well, you need to be a bigger coalition, well, it's not in his ADN, it's not in his essence in some way.
I agree with that, but I mean, eventually, I mean, it seems that maybe with the same, first, I think inflation, I think Milei in the year, at the end of 2026, in 2027, will show that inflation came down. I think the issue is not getting obsessed that you need to show the public that inflation is at 5%. But if inflation reaches 2027 with inflation and future inflation expectations of 15%, of 12, or I think he can claim that he did it. And hopefully the Argentinian voter on that front will say, well, this government achieved this. If Argentinians really say, no, he didn't bring inflation down because it's 15 and not 3, I think there has not been that many countries in Latin America that have been able to move to a floating exchange or stabilize inflation, etc., all in 4 years. When you look at the stabilization in Mexico, in Chile, in Peru, etc., it took much longer than 4 years, maybe 6, 7, but in 4 years they were in the low 2-digit range. And I think that's what I would call success on that front. On the political front, I totally agree with you that it's very hard to change political strategies and have any sense that that is going to be successful at this stage of the government, and with some given characteristics that each of us has for different things. I mean, if I tell you to become a painter, I think you will be pretty bad. And if they tell me to become a badminton player, I will suck, no? So
yeah, and even now the incentives for the opposition to become ally of are less, because you should try to build alliances when you are strong. When you are weak, people say, well, no, let's wait and let's just take power.
But those are his challenges, not our challenges. So I think we can open the floor for any questions that.
Thank you very much. 2 questions, if I may. One long-term and one short-term. Alejandro mentioned that Milei did a number of good things, and that is true. What did he do badly? Because he must have done something bad. And what are the lists of the things that he did badly? The 14 percentage point difference in Buenos Aires province is humongous. Historically, it's also humongous, particularly when you look at the participation of the electorate, which was close to 2/3. So they must have done something wrong. And I'd be interested to know what your opinion is of what is the list of things that are wrong. The long-term question is the following. INDEC and the Bank for International Settlements estimate that Argentine assets abroad are about 320 billion. Some people estimate it's about 340 billion. But let's go and be conservative and say that both INDEC and BIS are wrong and it's only 300 billion. So we've never seen not even 10% of that historically come back to Argentina and stay in Argentina for at least one electoral cycle. So what do Argentines know that we don't know? Because when you talk about country risk coming down from 1,400, it came down from 1,400 to 1,100. When they came into office, Alberto Fernandez had a country risk of about 800 basis points, and the lowest country risk in the hemisphere from Mexico to Tierra del Fuego is 67 basis points, which is Uruguay. That is enormous. So the markets know something, and the Argentines know something, and I'd be very interested to know what you think those things are. Thank you.
Any other question?
Well, that's a very good point. I think that at the end of the day, we trust more dollars than pesos. That's what we know, because whenever we save in pesos, suddenly we find with a huge devaluation and you lost everything you have been saving. So yeah, we tend to save in dollars. It's the lack of currency. That's what Argentines have learned, is that not necessarily our currency is going to keep its purchase power. And I think we learned that through several crises. I would say 2001, especially when there was a 300 points devaluation after the convertibility box that make each peso $1. And the other thing that, and related to that, and related to this case of Milei, we know it's hard for Argentina to increase its international reserves when the peso is appreciated. And now it is, at least from my point of view, artificially overvalued. So we know that at certain point the devaluation will hit us, so we move to dollars.
I'll say a couple of things. I mean, first, I will challenge a little bit your some assumptions that are kind of embedded in your questions to make this part of the seminar a little bit more interesting. I think it's a little bit super ambitious. I think in the panel, implicitly, we were very negative on the situation that Argentina has placed itself in. And I think all of that is correct. I mean, because there were some mistakes, etc. But I think also expecting that after an year and a half of government, you will have people really trusting that this is a permanent change and bringing back their assets into Argentina. I mean, if that's the case, and if that's what we call success, Argentina will never be successful, because in no country have we seen an inflation stabilization and reform program that after a year and a half generates the trust of national, international, etc. investors for people to come back and say, okay, there has been an historical change. This is done. Let's bring back our savings to Argentina because this is a completely different country. I think there you're putting the bar very, very high, even 10%. I mean, I think, okay, now these, look, no. Well, everybody knows. We know the history of Argentina. We know that this is not permanent. We know that there's a political party in Argentina as well that think that capital control, restructuring of public debt, and relatively high inflation are better policy choices than paying your debts, balancing the budget, etc. And in that sense, the jury is still out for Argentina. So thinking that not achieving that, it's a measure of complete failure. I think it's a little bit unjust for a government that, at least on the financial and fiscal front, I think they have done a lot. On the monetary and exchange rate front, they have been extremely confusing, misguided, and that's exactly where changes are needed on this combination of things. If we look inside the budget, well, we all would agree that you need a much more structured proposal for pensions, for health expenditure, for education, and you need political consensus for that thing to think that this could be sustainable. And that was a little bit the last question that I have. I mean, you balance the budget, but if in each item of the budget, you didn't have some kind of agreement with 65% of Argentinian society on what will be the permanent structure of the pension system, then when we go back to politics as usual, we will go back to what we had before. And I think there the politics are very important to provide a sense of permanence to these changes. And that's why I think it's very important that after these elections, there's a broader coalition to give a sense that these changes have more consensus within the Argentinian political class that we have.
I think in that respect that there is probably now I don't know if huge, but a broader consensus about fiscal order and macroeconomic order. I think there is a broader consensus than before. And I also think there is a broader consensus across parties that you cannot run a huge inflation. The failure of the previous Peronist government, I kind of think broader the coalition for fiscal order and not crazy inflation. So there is a broader coalition for not overheating the economy.
So in a way, it would be very good for Argentina if after the election, there could be at least not a broad coalition, but at least an important signal to the markets that on those three things, you have a congressional support for those anchor.
But
for
to,
the economy.
to achieve this, you need the government not to attack those, because then you are asking the support of those who you are attacking. And
I'm not saying that this is a problem of the opposition.
No,
I'm
no.
not saying that Argentina will need that, and maybe Milei as the president will need that to show that there's some agreements that go beyond his intentions. No.
Yeah, but we need to hope there that is not too late, that you are not calling for allies from when you are weak.
Another, sorry.
Hi, my name is Patricia Biermeyer. I am a professor here at Latin American Studies, but I am Argentine, so the Buenos Aires. So, and I am an agronomist. So my question goes particularly to what Alejandro said about the markets. Since I am an agronomist, I'm used to hear about retentions to the El Campo, retentions here, there. I'm sorry if you talk about this before because I was teaching and I didn't get the beginning. But my question is, how do we fare with retentions and the lifting of the good opportunities that the government presented? I have very good views and comments that finally, the last time that they said never the back to the field, never the back to the campo was Alfonsín. So now we wanted to know where are we standing on that, particularly I'm saying everything, livestock, and any market that does have to do with agriculture.
Thank you. We've been talking a lot about economics, but I have a question regarding politics, right? Which they're both linked, but specifically about political parties. It's not news to say that political parties have been in a crisis for a while, not only in Argentina, but worldwide as well. To the point that in the last couple of years in Argentina, we had two presidents that were outsiders or were coming from outside traditional political parties, in the sense of doing a career inside the party. And well, my question is, do you feel there is a shift happening in the political party structure in Argentina? And if so, in what direction? Is the nature of political parties changing, or it's something that it's slowly deteriorating?
So let me take maybe the first one, and you take, I mean, both if you want, but definitely the second one, that is a very, I mean, I think to me, the most important thing regarding the agricultural sector is that you cannot set the tax structure for one sector of the economy based on your balance of payment needs. So in a way, I mean, if you imagine if we were setting taxes for the manufacturing sector in Mexico, that is the sector that generates the most exports, depending on long-term interest rates in the US. I mean, that's crazy, because if you're a producer of TVs, you want to know what your tax is going to be, not that your tax is going to go up when money is not flowing into the country, then your tax is going to go down where capital flows are flowing into the country. the tax uncertainty that you're injecting into a key sector of the economy is huge, and that limits the investment and the commitment that entrepreneurs do to that sector. So I think Argentina eventually needs to move to have a much better tax system that will allow them not to generate so much uncertainty on one key sector for the economy. To me, that's the most important thing, without knowing the exact movements that took place the last weeks and what's going to happen in the future. But from a structural point of view, it will be very important to have a much more stable structure for the agricultural system.
Just before starting this panel, we were talking with Alejandro and comparing Mexico's parties with Argentine parties. Argentine parties has never been that strong, at least in the sense of institutional organization. So they are weakly institutionalized. So the Peronist has always been more following a strong figure, maybe like it's the Republicans today here, just following whatever Trump says. So in Argentina, it has been with Perón, but then with Menem, and with Menem, they turn to the right, and then with Kirchner, they turn to the left. So we have never had very strong institutionalized parties. Our parties has always been closer to movements in that sense. The strongest parties, I will say, the socialism, but they have not been large, with exception in the province in one of the states in Santa Fe, and the Radical Party that lately they do not get more than 5% of the vote. So, sorry, I didn't want to injure the radicals. So they have never been that strong, and I do not imagine now in this situation becoming stronger. Rather the opposite, yes. I imagine we are moving more into movements with strong charismatic figures, as Milei is, for example. Milei almost does not have a party organization. When they try to find local candidates, they just almost auction it, because they don't have a party organization. And even I'm almost 2 centimeters close to say, I imagine even the next president being an outlier. It's because it's more about candidate-based campaign than about party campaigns.
Urgent question. Let me close this. Thank everybody for coming. Thank Rodrigo for being here in Washington, D.C. with us at this very interesting moment for the Argentine economy, for Argentina as a country. And just again, I mean, looking from a Latin American perspective, when we look at processes of stabilizing high inflation, of restructuring economies, etc., 18 months is a pretty short term, and it's unfortunate that this political calendar, 4 years presidential terms, midterms that come very soon, really also generates, I think, significant biases that make it even more difficult for the country to stabilize.
Thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you very much, Denise, for organizing this.